So this time we're going to look at the very famous sequence where Scotty first sees Madeleine in Ernie's restaurant. It's an entirely silent cinema style sequence. It depends on music partially, but everything else, performance, editing, mise-en-scène, cinematography, they're all the things that carry the meaning in the sequence, which is notable after a pair of very long dialogue-heavy exposition scenes. We start off with an exterior shot establishing the location for the first of 3 times, and we see an anonymous man walking past. Perhaps an echo of the earlier scene where we see Hitchcock doing his cameo as he walks past the shipping yard. The previous longer scenes have set up the collision between the urges towards the feminine and the masculine, and Scotty's dissatisfaction with one and desire for the other, very subtly. And here we have everything coming together, and Scotty, who we've already seen in the sequence with Midge, concerned about the state of his masculinity, is drawn into Elster's trap. And in this situation we see a site where we will keep returning in the film, one of the many obsessions and all part of the circularity of the film. The cinematography is significant here and very characteristic of Hitchcock. If you've seen Rear Window or Rope or Psycho, the opening shot of each of those films is a camera creeping around as if it's a very nosy individual. This is very typical of Hitchcock's style of cinematography, as if the camera itself is a character. Now in this scene we are being drawn into a trap. We are being drawn into an illusion created by Elster, and the camera movement here seems to reflect that. We are given the illusion of control, as if the camera is following our gaze as a sort of neutral character wandering around watching events, being very, very nosy. But actually, of course, it's Hitchcock who's steering the camera and we are just following it. We're being shown exactly where to look, how to perceive things, and the way Hitchcock crafts the sequence, we are being told what to think and feel about what we're seeing. So here we are tracking towards the door, and significantly it's a dissolve. It could just be a straight cut, but why not? The dissolve here adds to the whole idea of fantasy, false reality. We're entering a dream that's been created for us, and this links up to the very dreamlike nature, the odd time compressions that appear in the film, the way events repeat themselves and loop round and are replayed again and again. It's all part of an illusion later on. And we find ourselves approaching these bright red doors. Now the red obviously links to Elster's office, a subtle indication of Elster's control over the events. Everything we're seeing is staged by Elster. The dissolve and some of the dreamy, soft-focus cinematography we're going to get later on all adds to the dreamlike elements of the film. The vivid red of the interior of the restaurant, the doorways that seem quite confusing in terms of the architecture, and all the pictures on the walls, these are all things that are going to crop up in the film over and over. Hitchcock is building up the suspense very subtly as to what it is that Scotty is seeing. At this stage in the sequence, all we hear is the very, very quiet clattering of cutlery on plates and murmured conversation, and then we start moving across the room. Part of the colour scheme is, of course, the costume of all the other people in the restaurant. Men are almost all in black. The women are in very, very subdued greys usually. Note the portrait in the background to the shot here. There she is on the left of the screen, the woman not in grey. The signature Hitchcock blonde hair. She's of interest. Our attention's caught by that green of her dress, even though we can't see her face. We pick her out from the crowd. Hitchcock's mise-en-scène is encouraging us and steering our gaze, just as Elster is steering Scotty's gaze in the sequence. the camera starts to centralise on her and then begins to track forward. And there we see Elster, so we know that the woman that he's with has to be Madeleine, based on what he said earlier. Then we cut to a shot of Scotty. Bernard Herrmann's music is of course creating the mood here. It's a very, very romantic piece, and it's going to become Madeleine's theme, and that is going to obsess Scotty for the rest of the film. So Scotty looks, and then we have the reverse shot of exactly what he sees. Still, we're teased as to what this woman looks like. We've known about her presence from the previous scene. There she is, framed like a work of art. We've got the frame of the camera itself, with a portrait on one side and half a man's head and a glimpse of the other side of that column into the main part of the restaurant. And then we've got the door frame, and then we've got a further frame behind the characters, all adding to this labyrinthine sense, perhaps linking back to the opening titles by Saul Bass, where we are falling in towards this eye and we see these spiral shapes. It's like a tunnel, and doorways throughout the rest of the film are going to become highly significant in the way that they frame Madeleine. And there she is, staged. This is not only a portrait, it's a performance, it's a play put on by Elster. Scotty already feels some sort of shame for the way he's looking and has to avert his gaze. There's a lot of guilt in this film experienced by Scotty. The transference of guilt from the actual criminal to the wrong man figure is central to Hitchcock. There she is, fully framed 3 times over. And we start to see her. We've known about her from Elster's description, and here she is coming into view, the perfect creation. Note the flower in the foreground as well, another symbol that will be associated with Madeleine and Carlotta later on. And she stops in the doorway. The lighting puts Elster in darkness as he briefly pauses to have a chat with the waiter. The lighting, of course, highlights Madeleine. At this stage, she is, of course, performing for Scotty. He thinks he's watching her unknown, but of course a second viewing reveals that to be entirely an illusion. Madeleine, the camera, the lighting all position themselves into the profile shot. A shot that's going to haunt this film, is going to be repeated again and again and again, indicating the presence of Madeleine. This motif of the absent character's presence is central to Vertigo. And if you care to watch any other Hitchcock film, the absent character who haunts the present is the motif to several Hitchcock films. If you've seen Rebecca, very obviously there. It's also present in Psycho, Bruno's father in Strangers on a Train. We have the murdered David, whose body is off screen but haunts the whole film in Rope. We've also got the character in North by Northwest of George Kaplan, the character who doesn't exist. Here she is, perfectly framed for us, perfectly lit, shallow focus. All of these are coding her with to be looked at-ness. A very interesting cut that we shift from her to Scotty. He's already looking away, and strangely the shot of him is in profile and almost mirrors the shot of her. Perhaps this might link to the loss of his identity later on. Think about where he physically becomes Carlotta or Madeleine falling to their death in the dream sequence, where he falls into blankness, nothingness. The flare of light that subdues is only barely noticeable in the finished film. It's notably there in the trailer. Hitchcock evidently thought it was a bit too much, but it remains as a little ghost there. Elster, the shadowy figure in the background. His screen time in the film is fairly small, but of course his presence looms large over everything. Cut to Scotty, now looking the other way, following them out. And here we rely on the music, the cinematography, and of course James Stewart's wonderful performance. We don't now need a scene of him returning to Ulster to explain that he's decided to take on the job. Clearly he's going to. One last furtive glance, and there we see more strange columns that don't actually appear to be dividing walls. Again, this sense of labyrinth and disorientating space, and of course this couple are walking towards a mirror, which becomes a highly significant prop in the film later on, and also adds to our sense of space being disorientated. Here we see both Madeleine and Elster reflected in the mirror briefly as they walked past. This of course links to the scene in the clothes shop later on, where we see Judy and Scotty also reflected in the mirror. Or the scene in Judy's apartment, another scene where both Judy and Scotty are reflected in the mirror, reminding us of how the male character is creating this perfect image of this female character. Very, very subtle looks about his eyes. We can tell exactly what he's thinking. And of course, like so many scenes in the film, we slowly dissolve. Again, the sense of time blurring, dreamlike. We dissolve to Scotty in his car. He's taken on the job. He's taken the bait.